Chapter 15, Wallpaper Clue. As Nancy waited, the two shadowy forms crept closer. The one coming across the lawn appeared first. Then suddenly the voice of the other cut the air from among the trees. "Nancy, where are you?" Mr. March! His ill-timed call from the pine grove served as a warning to the intruder. Instantly he turned and fled. Nancy dashed from her hiding place. As she pursued the running figure, the young detective shouted to her friends to join in the chase. They came quickly, but the race was futile. The night swallowed up the stranger. As the discouraged girls returned to the house, Nancy explained what had happened. George was annoyed. It's bad enough to have missed capturing the thief, but now he's been warned that we're looking for him. We've probably missed our chance, too, of finding out how he gets into the house, added Nancy in disappointment. Oh, why did Mr. March have to pick out just that moment to look for us? Bess complained. I suppose he meant well, said Nancy. The elderly man was apologetic over his untimely appearance. He had grown uneasy about the girls, he explained, and had come outside to make sure they were all right. When he could find no one, he had become fearful that something had happened to them and had called out, unaware of the nearness of the intruder. It was agreed that the mysterious stranger certainly would not return that night, so the girls went to bed. Upon awakening the next morning, Nancy heard faint music from a distance. Mr. March has the radio on early, she thought. When Nancy reached the dining room, she found him already at the breakfast table with Susan, but neither of them was eating. They were listening to a man singing. "One of my daddy's pieces, Nancy!" cried the little girl. As Nancy listened, she realized this composition was somewhat different from the others Mr. March attributed to his son. It was a beautiful love song in waltz time. 3 words caught the girl's attention. My heart's desire. Where have I heard that phrase before in connection with this mystery? She mused. For nearly an hour, the melody continued to haunt her. Then suddenly she knew why. Running to Mr. March, she exclaimed, "I believe you were right in the first place about the clue to the missing music." "How's that?" "Why, those letters written by your son to his wife. The words, 'my heart's desire,' appear in one of them." "So they do," the elderly man agreed. Nancy was eager to read the love letters again. Since they were still at her own home, she decided to go there at once. But before Nancy could leave, Susan called her upstairs to admire the child's dress-up costume. Holding up a trailing skirt with one hand, she flourished a silk parasol in the other. "I found these in the hall closet. Let's go down and show Grandpa," Susan said eagerly. "Do I look like a real grown-up lady now?" "Those high-heeled shoes certainly make you seem taller." Nancy smiled. "Watch out, or you'll trip." As they started down the stairway, the child stumbled on the steps. Nancy, who was only a few steps behind, grabbed Susan just in time. But the sharp-pointed parasol got out of control and tore a jagged hole in the wallpaper. It revealed several bars of music. "Oh, I didn't mean to do it," Susan cried in dismay. "What will Grandpa say?" "It wasn't your fault," Nancy assured her. "Fortunately, you weren't hurt. And you've uncovered a clue," she exclaimed. Excitedly, Nancy examined the torn place. Several tiny bars of music were painted on the wall. Nancy summoned Mr. March to the stairway. At first he thought she was calling attention to the costume, but when the elderly man saw the music notes, he too became excited. "Maybe it's part of one of our old family songs," he exclaimed. "I'd like to know if there's any more of it here. Let's tear off the paper," Mr. March urged. "It's too faded to worry about anyway." Inch by inch, with the help of Nancy, Bess, and George, he removed a large area of the wall covering. It was slow, tedious work, but at last they were successful. Gradually, a charming, old-fashioned scene was revealed of a woman seated at a piano and a man beside her singing. The last bit of paper to come off partially covered the music rack of the piano. Someone had sketched in a sheet of music, the notes of which had first drawn Nancy's attention. Printed in tiny lettering was the composer's name, a member of the March family. Nancy hummed the pictured notes. The tune was indeed one which Phip March had elaborated upon, and was a current hit. "Now we have real proof that Ben Banks is an impostor. This is one of the melodies he claims as his," Mr. March exclaimed. "Would a court accept such evidence?" George asked. "I think it would," Nancy said soberly. "Of course, it might not be necessary to go to such lengths. If Mr. Jenner knows we have a case against him, he'll probably prefer to settle matters without a lawsuit. If you wish, Mr. March, I'll see the publisher." "Yes, do that," he urged. Nancy asked Bess and George if they would accompany her to Mr. Jenner's office in Oxford, a town several miles from River Heights. The girls were eager to go and suggested starting at once. An hour later, they arrived at their destination, a dingy brick structure. "This isn't very inviting," said Bess as they entered. From an upstairs room came the strains of a swing band. In another section of the building, someone was picking out a few notes on a piano. "Listen!" Nancy cried suddenly. "I don't hear anything except that loud music," George declared. "The tune is catchy, but all those discords." "The person at the piano is playing one of Phip March's songs," Nancy said. The girls moved nearer to the closed door. Soon the piano playing ceased abruptly. After waiting a moment, the callers went along the hall until they came to a door which bore the name of the music publisher. Nancy and her friends entered. They found themselves in an untidy little room. A desk was piled high with papers, books, and stacks of music. A girl sat at a typewriter. She chewed gum to the rhythm of her typing and did not look up for a long while. "Well?" she inquired at last. "May we see Mr. Jenner, please?" Nancy requested politely. The girl looked her over from head to toe. "If you have music to sell, you've come to the wrong place. Mr. Jenner isn't buying from amateurs." "I have nothing to sell," Nancy replied. "Please give my name to your employer." She removed a card from her purse. The office girl accepted it with a shrug and vanished into an inner room. She did not return for several minutes. Then her message was crisp and to the point. "Mr. Jenner isn't seeing anybody today except one of his composers. And he said to tell you it wouldn't do any good to come back either." "I see," said Nancy. Flushing slightly, she turned away. "I was afraid this might happen," she declared as the girls paused in the hall. "I feel like going back in there and demanding an interview," George said. "Let your father handle that horrid man," Bess pleaded. Determined not to go home without finding out something, Nancy paused again. Then she walked down the corridor where she suspected Mr. Jenner's private office was located. Through an open transom came voices. Ben, we're in a tight spot, they heard the music publisher say. That Drew girl has just left here. Maybe she has found some proof. Impossible, replied the other voice. Just the same, it may be well to call off your scheduled public appearances and lie low for a while. We can't take chances. Nancy and her friends strained to hear more. The voices dropped, however, and the girls could not make out another word. Mr. Jenner must be talking to Ben Banks, Nancy whispered excitedly. Oh, I wish we could learn more about that fellow. Maybe we can, George said in her friend's ear. Why not stay around here until he comes out of that office? And then follow him, Nancy added. You girls wait outside the building. I'll watch this door. Bess and George immediately tiptoed down the hallway and vanished. Nancy looked about for a hiding place. The best one she could find was a little niche near the stairway. 20 minutes elapsed. At the end of that time, the door of Mr. Jenner's office opened. Out stepped a lean, long-haired man of early middle age. He had a roll of music under his arm. Nancy was convinced that he must be Ben Banks. Waiting until he had rounded the corner, she followed him. At the street entrance, she spotted Bess and George standing in a shadowy doorway. With a nod of her head, she signaled to them. The man walked rapidly. Of one thing Nancy was certain. This thin man was not the strange intruder at the March homestead. The prowler was heavy-set. Without once glancing back, Banks walked on until he came to a small hotel, the Millet. Entering, he went directly to the desk. Nancy, Bess, and George stood in the lobby. They heard the man say to the desk clerk, My key, please. Yes, Mr. Dite, the other replied, handing it to him. Dite! Nancy almost exclaimed aloud. End of chapter 15.